Okay, so we put the capacitors on. Right now I'm putting in some electrodes. And if you remember, there was some spots where I had gotten sloppy with the iron, and solder ended up in some holes where I wasn't working yet. So what I just did here, on the electrolytic capacitors, one leg is longer than another by a lot, okay? And I had one hole open and one hole had splashed solder from me being sloppy. And this is really, really bad. You don't want that to happen. Because when you try to remove it, you can use this tape. This tape is really a good way to do it. Solder removal tape. And what I do is I add flux to it, and that makes it work quite a bit more better as far as like sucking the solder up out of the hole. So then you put it over the offending hole that's full of solder that you need to poke a part through, and then you lay the iron on it sideways and you kind of move it back and forth, and it'll eventually suck that out. The other way you can do it is you'll have, let's say, one hole full, one hole not. And with these the capacitors, I don't know if you can see that, they're offset. They're offset by...
no, not in the light. It's too bright.
They're offset by quite a bit. So in the case where I'm trying to get one in, what I'll do is I will offset it. I'll chop it down like much more reasonable. So then the hole that is open, you pop in there, and then you'll have this little guy is going to press on that solder point. You look up at the top and line it up, and then you go in the back and you'll use I've got a real fine pointed soldering iron tip, and I'll use that to heat up that solder and poke through. So that's how I was able to deal with that on these capacitors. These other, the orange ones, and then these box film capacitors. These box film ones are expensive. These are orange multi-layer, and you can get a set of the multi-layer capacitors. You can get a set of those fairly affordably. We've got ours that's multi-layers, and they're lower value. They go like they're non-polarized, so they come right up to where the electrodes start at 1 UF, 1 microfarad, I should say. So yeah, I just installed, there's like a bunch of 1 UF electrodes all in a row. So I'm going to go ahead and solder those in. What happened was, if you were following along, I went through here kind of sloppily and really hurried on some of the resistors, and I got solder all over the board. I was not thinking, and you really don't want to do that. It can be catastrophic. And what happened was I filled in holes where the chip socket goes, and that's not really good. That's like a worst case thing that you can have happen. There's 3 chip sockets on this project, and I had one chip socket had 1 hole plugged, and with that one I was able to make sure that the chip socket I was using had the little legs lined up perfectly because they were all bent, and then I put pressure on it and went in and heated up the one. The other one down here, 3 of the holes were filled, and I tried using the solder sucker. I really should have gotten some pressure. If you have a compressor, an air compressor, I would recommend fasten this down, heat this thing up, and blast some air through it to try to blow the hole out, or use a solder sucker. But I kept messing with it, and eventually what will happen is the trace will break and it'll rip out, and that happened on this. So at that point we were missing 3 of the traces where you install the socket or the chip. Like, I don't ever just solder a chip in, I always use a chip socket. So in this case, 3 of those pins for that IC chip weren't making any contact because the copper ripped. So what we did, we looked at the schematic diagram. We found where it said IC3. Like basically, I looked at the picture. It says IC1, IC2, IC3. So I know, okay, I'm looking at IC3, and we find that on the schematic. And then I counted out like, okay, this is leg 1, leg 2, leg 3, leg 4, leg 5, 6, 7, and 8. And it was 5, 6, and 7 that were torn out. There was literally no copper to grab onto. So they were just sticking through. And what I saw was leg 7 went down to this capacitor, and leg 5 went over to this capacitor, and leg 6 and 7 of the chip went over to this resistor, R32, which is this resistor here, 3.3K. And what I did, because see, there's two sides to this chip. Inside of it, there's 2 op amps. And that's designated on the diagram. And what I'm thinking is, how did I figure out exactly where to run these jumpers? Well, you use your Kant test, and this is what I talked about at the beginning of the video, saying when all else fails, you can figure stuff out by doing these Kant tests. So I'm like, all right, here's these 4 resistors. We're looking at a different version of the schematic. It's a different version, and there was an extra resistor at the bottom of the list, at the bottom here. So I just figured, well, that's not on here. So it starts with a 100 K, then it's a 3.3K, a 4.7K, and another 3.3K. And so flipping them over and putting my leads on this 3.3K and then getting beep beep Kant to there, that told me that, hey, this is the right capacitor that one is hooking up to this chip here on the A side. So my B side, my other 3.3, because there's only 3.3K resistors in the whole project. So that limited it down right away, because I looked and it said where your trace is broken on pin 6 goes to a 3.3K resistor. So I went to the other side, the far side, away from that chip. So the other side of that resistor, it's showing on the schematic that goes to this capacitor. And there I got that. So that's telling me, okay, this is in fact the resistor that ties into that chip on leg 6 and 7. So I soldered a small piece of wire. What I did was, first I tried bending some of the demons that come off of the capacitor. And that's what I used for the first one. The first one was a 2. It made 2 connections. So I just made a little C piece and soldered it on each end as a jumper wire. The second one, that wasn't working. I got one in there, and then when I pulled the soldering iron up, it stuck to the iron. So what I did was I stripped some wire, and you put the goop on it, and then I tied it in. I tied it in on one end here, and let that dry, and then I bent it around my hobby knife and cut it. And then I just got in there, and I worked from the other end with my wife holding down as a heat bridge to stop the heat from kind of going through. And I would real quickly put some solder on it, try to grab it onto leg 6 and then leg 7 without heating it up so much that it would come disconnected from that first point I had soldered on, which is R32. And then when I was done, I beep Kant from the top side, like, is this really good? And so coming in here, yeah, see, it's really hard to get at it. I've got to extend my probe with this needle here to get in here from the top, but we should hear there we go. Now I know that it's making contact through there. So I'm really glad that happened today when I was filming, so I could show you troubleshooting and how to unfudge yourself when something really nasty happens. And like I said, this is me getting out of the loop, and I'm going to make a video and hurrying up and like, oh yeah, I'm embarrassed because it's like I'm doing one at a time and people are going to make comments. you really do want to take your time in that spilling. To be honest with you, here's an idea. Tape it off. Tape the board off and remove tape as you go. That, like, if I had an expensive board and I was worried about it, that's what I would do. Yeah, it's going to take extra time, but it's going to ensure you don't have that problem. The other way is just be really careful. Don't be a pig and get in there and flopping stuff around. I guarantee you, you will do it. You will fill at least one hole on a PCB. Typically, I've done multiple holes on chip sockets before. I have to admit it, I've done it. And that's just one of the downfalls that happens when you're working with a PCB. But we'll come back after we're going to be doing the transistors, and I'll update you when we get to the transistors. Sound good? See how horrible I am when I work? Can you believe this? What a shit show. Unbelievable, huh? Horrible mess that I made here. How much you want to bet it works? All right, we'll see you soon.